This Real Agriculture podcast is brought to you by Genesis Fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizer is your farm's #1 expense. Farmers are working together through Genesis Fertilizers to solve the problem of high prices and security of supply by planting a state-of-the-art nitrogen plant. Security and earnings through ownership is the solution. Visit Genesis today at genesisfertilizers.com to learn more.
And joining us right now is a very, very familiar friend to Real Agriculture is Chuck Penner of Leftfield Commodity Research based out of Winnipeg, Manitoba. Chuck, how are you doing today?
Good. I came down south to Minot to get some warm weather.
Yeah, you're in the banana belt of North Dakota. Is that what you're saying?
You betcha.
You know, anything's better than last week.
Yeah.
Man,
yeah.
I'll tell you.
Yeah, it was brutal out your way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, Chuck, let's talk about the pulse market. Overall right now, how would you describe demand? Is demand strong right now? Are China and India coming through? Just give us a brief overview.
Well, it is interesting. I mean, of course, as always, it goes crop by crop and subcrop by subcrop and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, I would say pulses are in a good spot. We developed something a few weeks ago we released it a few weeks ago. It's called the Market Strength Scorecard. So it takes all the different crops and looks at things like seasonality and momentum and historic price strength and then fundamentals. And so it's a composite score. And basically all of the pulses are toward the top compared to, things like canola and spring wheat and those kind of things. So there aren't any, there are a little better and a little worse, but for the most part, pulses are the strongest scores out there right now.
What's driving that? Has it been the dry bias through the northern plains and Western Canada? Is that really the driver? Concern about supply?
Well, it is a big part. We had a drop in acreage of peas and lentils last year, and then the yields were compromised as well too. So that's part of it. But for things like something like peas, all of a sudden, we had penciled India out of the picture for this year. And then as we were watching over the last number of months, pea prices in India started to move higher and then really move higher. And thought, okay, so there's a good chance that they're gonna drop this tariff, and that is in fact what happened. So you have it used to be in the old days it used to be India was the buyer, and then when they dropped out, China became the buyer. So we only had one major buyer at a time. Now we have two. And the only issue with India is that for now that the deadline is of the zero tariff is March 31st. Right. But that could be extended. I'd probably put 50-50 odds on that being extended right now. So if it is, then suddenly they're going to be buying all for the rest of the year and maybe even buying, and probably buying some new crop peas as well too. So that starts to change the whole new crop picture for peas, for yellow peas in particular.
Does India treat the U.S. and Canada the same, or talk about that a little bit?
On paper, yes. Part of it is you have historic trade relationships with individual companies, traders and companies and things like that. And so those are hard to break. The other thing about the U.S. market is that most of their export business for pulses has been, and I don't have an exact number or anything, but has been built around food aid and things like that. So these government tenders are a large part of the export business that they do. So I know I'm generalizing, but they seem to put less emphasis on regular export trade, whereas Canada, that's all that we have. So there's a bit of a difference in how they approach that, how the exporters, Canada and the U.S. approach the market. I don't know that U.S. peas would be, or lentils would be looked down on or frowned upon in the Indian market, let's say. But yeah, I think it's just a historic difference in how they market.
What about the application of tariffs?
Well, right now, I believe that the Indian government has made the U.S. tariffs equal to every other country on pulses. Now, I could be mistaken, but I'm pretty sure that's the case. That happened, I think, a couple of months ago, where they basically dropped their extra U.S. tariffs, and now it's just the. But I better double check on that before this goes to air.
Now we were just talking about lentils and peas. As we move into Montana, a lot of interest, of course, in chickpeas. What's that market been like?
Well, it's been a little quiet. The prices have been a little quieter than I would think. Export trade, Canadian exports of chickpeas have been very strong again this year. Uh, a lot of it is just cross-border trade though with the U.S. So the chickpea market, the Canadian chickpea market is closely tied to the U.S. So it's we do export to other countries, Pakistan and some other countries and things like that. But right now, it seems that it's mostly a North American market, and we're seeing prices in other countries though really take off. And so I think there's going to be continued really strong demand for chickpeas in the next little while. And I think that should be supportive for prices because we don't have a whole lot of them here again this year.
Yeah. It's interesting. As I've been talking to farmers, everyone recognizes, green peas and green lentils. That's the place to be. And if you've got some old crop hanging out in a bin and you've been just waiting for prices to be high, you have found your time. And if you're still sitting on them, I'm not sure what you're doing. But hey, everybody can make those decisions. But in a sense, though, different than maybe say like a wheat or a canola. I think there's not as much willingness to say, hey, I'm going to jump into producing green peas
Yeah,
because it's more difficult. And well, one, availability of seed is also a bit of a factor here. But what some producers have been saying to me is, yeah, like those guys that can do it and they want to do it and they want to take the risk, they can do it. I'm sticking with yellow peas. So we may not see the acre expansion that we would see necessarily in some other crops with some a crop like green peas.
yeah. Well, I think we will see acres go up. It's just
Yeah, but it won't be
it's a
explosive.
matter of how much. I mean, you get these statements. Well, nobody's going to grow this or everybody's going to grow this, and you know that those are exaggerations and
Yeah.
what. Um, I think the seed supplies will be a real limit, and probably more so on the Canadian side of the border. Last year's pea and lentil crops in the U.S. were not bad, and so I think there might be a little bit more seed available south of the border. So, and even when I was down in Great Falls in November, people were already talking about boosting green lentil acres down there. So I think that's going to be the case again, or we'll see a further expansion in that. My concern is that those, of course, it all depends on the weather. But if we have an increase in acreage, a sizable increase in acreage, the size of those markets is pretty fixed. So you can actually fairly easily overproduce for things like green peas, especially green lentils. You can sometimes get a bunch more going to India, but otherwise the rest of that market is fairly fixed. So in my mind, it's fine if you want to grow them, but I would be getting a good chunk of them priced essentially, just because the new crop bids are, I think I was just looking this morning in Canada, they're 50 mid 50s for both small greens and large green lentils. So, they're not the 70s, but which are record prices, but mid 50s is quite something.
It's pretty good. And I've the last couple of years traveled a lot through Montana and North Dakota, and there's a lot of interest in expanding pulse acres. Growers look in those two states north of the border and they say, "Hey, look at the opportunity this has provided the Western Canadian grower. Why not here? A lot of same weather patterns, soil types. There's an opportunity there." What's your message today to the delegates at the Northern Pulse Grower meeting?
Yeah, for sure. I would say again, I think that's great. I think we can continue to grow those markets, but the part of it will be the marketing. And again, just getting back to a comment I made earlier about that a lot of it has been focused on food tenders, food aid tenders, and things like that. I think maybe the U.S. marketers will need to be more regular export focused. And then that will help grow some of those markets. And yeah, they'll compete with Canadian farmers, and that's all fine and good. I think we have North American markets in a whole bunch of different crops, and so it hasn't killed any other markets. So why wouldn't it do that for pulses?
Yeah, look at beef and pork as just one example for sure. Iron sharpens iron. Isn't that how
Absolutely.
how the saying goes? Well, hey, Chuck, thanks a lot for joining us. Really appreciate it. Enjoy your time in Minot, and we'll talk to you again soon, I'm sure.
Okay, thanks, Shaun.